Welcome to Seattle Rotary. I'm Cindy Runger, president of this club. And for those of you who are new to Rotary, there are 1.2 million of us around the world dedicated to a life of leadership and service. And Seattle Rotary, being one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world, is a place where we can find world-class speakers, network with a great community, and also make an impact locally and also globally. So please be seated for past President Bill Center with the inspiration.
Thank you, President Cindy. I was just thinking it's too bad we don't have Ray Charles still around to record a version of that. So today is Committee Fair Day. You might have noticed your Inspiration Committee doesn't have a table out there, but we're always on the lookout for fresh, inspiring voices. If you're inspired to join us, just call me, text me, email me, or tap me on the shoulder. Your fellow Rotarians would love to be inspired by you. And I don't have a table, but I do have a pocket full of candy, and I'll be hanging around out there after the meeting, so hopefully I'll see a couple of you. Reflecting on today's speaker, I pondered the question of who do I trust and why do I trust them? I trust my family. I've been blessed with a trustworthy family. That trust, built on bonds of love and strengthened through adversity, has stood the test of time. I trust my friends, my shipmates, and my fellow Rotarians. They've earned that trust by weathering storms and demonstrating through the years true integrity and fidelity. And I've learned to trust myself by weathering my own storms and withstanding my own integrity and fidelity challenges through those same years. Finally, I trust our Creator. My faith has been tested, and I've learned over and over again that my life simply works better when I place my faith in Him, in my family, in my friends, and in myself. Please join me in a moment of prayer. We thank you, God, for the gift of faith, which makes it possible for us to place our trust in you and in those you send to help us along the way. Amen.
Okay, and now to introduce the main program is Lisa Mayfield. Now, Lisa reminded me that I can take credit for this amazing person joining Rotary, and I will definitely take credit for it because she's the perfect example of a person with leadership DNA and the service soul. So Lisa and I met 15 years ago when we were both launching our new businesses. I left law and began a journey in finance, and she began her now very successful and influential Aging Wisdom. She's built a stellar reputation as a leader in her industry, and now she's been elected as a 2019 president of her professional association, Aging Life Care Association. Please welcome the coolest and funniest person I know, Lisa Mayfield.
I don't know where she got that. So trust is defined by Webster's dictionary as assured reliance on the character, ability, or strength of someone or something, one in which confidence is placed, dependence on something future or contingent, hope. No matter what kind of work or volunteer activities you do, trust is at the foundation. Earning trust takes time and is often a gradual process. Losing trust, however, often happens much more quickly. Today, our presentation will explore the 2018 Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a global measure of trust in our government, business, and media, and the impact these results have on our lives here in Seattle. Our speaker, Will Ludlam, leads Edelman's Pacific Northwest region, which includes offices in Seattle and Portland, and more than 250 communications marketing professionals. Will came to us through our member Jan Levy, who served with Will on the Seattle Center Advisory Commission, where he still serves. At Edelman, Will works closely with clients to identify innovative and strategic ways to break through tough communication challenges, from brand differentiation to public health activation. Prior to joining Edelman, Will managed the Northwest offices for Hill and Knowlton and worked over a decade with Porter Novelli, building their global network and the responsibility of the firm's Asian Pacific region, where he helped clients successfully understand and influence key markets like China and India. Over the past 25 years, you don't look old enough for the 25 years, Will has worked with countless local, regional, and global clients. His background includes a strong foundation in corporate and technology PR, providing strategic counsel and crisis communication support to blue-chip companies like Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, Safeco, Itron, Starbucks, and Seattle Children's Hospital. Will is a WSU grad, for all the cougars out there, serves on the advisory board for their Edward R. Murrow College of Communications, is a member of the Seattle Chamber's Community Development Roundtable, and is a trustee at Intiman Theater. So please help me give a warm Rotary welcome to Will.
Good afternoon. Boy, I have to start by just saying, as somebody that spent my entire career in public relations, how humbling and inspiring to hear about Don's career and the impact that he's had on the Pacific Northwest. So I was just, I feel privileged to be a part of a day that gets to celebrate somebody as meaningful as that. I don't have wine to auction. I don't play the banjo, but I do have data. So we'll start there. And let me start by saying that we're in a unique position, that the genesis for the Edelman Trust Barometer actually dates back to the WTO riots that happened in Seattle. And Richard Edelman was looking at the disconnect that seemed to be happening between the various institutions, and clearly a lack of understanding and a lack of trust. And that was the really the inspiration and the idea behind looking at trust as a measurement tool. And now we have 18 years of data to look back on. And I'll say he was deliberate in looking at trust versus reputation, because reputation is looking backwards, and trust is how I think you're going to behave in the future based on how you've behaved in the past. So it was a very specific and deliberate move. Real quick, I'll give you just some parameters behind the, if I can get the slide to advance. As I said, we're in our 18th year. The data that you're going to see is going to look at both the general public and the informed public. You should also know that we now, this data set represents roughly 15% of the population globally. So statistically very significant, and I'll point out some points of changes that we've seen over the past several years. The data went out in the field in November. So we'll just, post-election, we'll be looking at doing the data set again. And I say that because there were some significant events. If you look at what happened with Cambridge Analytica and some of the criticism that has come out over social media and transparency around privacy and data, one can only imagine what the trust data is going to look like this next year. So a quick trip down memory lane of trust. I won't cover each point, but we saw the fall of the celebrity CEO back in 2002. We saw trust in a person like me start to rise with social media in 2005. And so you see this ebb and flow of trust and who we trust as far as institutions varying throughout the last several years. This last year, we really saw what we called a trust in crisis. And I kind of like to refer to it, I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago and I said, last year felt like the first season of Lost. The plane has crashed. This feels like season 2. Plane still crashed. It's not, there are still some dark statistics to look at, but we're starting to see tribes form. We're starting to see that there are opportunities and advancements that can be made if we pay attention and we look at the markers. And that's really what I'd like to focus on today. It's how can we have an impact within our community based on the data that we have in front of us. I'll start with we'll start at the bottom and we'll work our way out. I'll start with the fact that we saw no recovery this past year in the 4 institutions. And we look at government, NGOs, media, and business as the 4 pillar institutions that we look at. And what you'll see in the data this year is that we saw no rise in the 4 pillars. If you look at the general public, all 4 institutions are well, around or below 50%. And if you look at the informed public, we actually see that this is the first time that business now is equal with NGOs as far as the level of trust, a little bit above 50%. And that's going to come to play in a little bit later when I talk about the role that you have as business leaders and really having an impact and not sitting on the sidelines and waiting for government or NGOs to take the lead role and really moving beyond your responsibility to sell a product, but to actually activate and be active in your community. But let's set the stage for what has happened in the U.S. this last year. If we look at the general population, you'll see that in 2007, the U.S. was roughly in the neutral zone, and we dropped approximately 9 points, negative points, to be now in the middle of the distrusted pack. So clearly the U.S. as a country has really lost the trust of its citizens, and we've seen a major decline. You'll also notice there that China rose to the position of number 1 trust, and that's citizens within that that country and where they place their level of trust. If we look at that informed public, and informed public for us are people that have a higher education, higher income, and they consume media on a regular basis. The informed public, the U.S. dropped from trusting at roughly 68% to the very bottom. Largest drop that we've seen in the 18 years of doing trust. The U.S. dropped 23 points in 1 year with the informed public, which is really profound. It really speaks to some of the major dynamics that we're seeing taking place in the U.S. right now. With this, one of the things that we saw is that people are really starting to search for truth. What is truth, and where can they find and understand what is truthful in the community? And I'm going to share some data points around discerning between fact and fake news. Related to that, and this really symbolizes that I think people are really coming to grips with some of the issue of fake news and fake platforms. For the first time, we saw a jump in journalism. Journalism went up 5 points on the trust index, while platforms dropped. And the subtlety there is, think of platforms as far as Facebook, Google. It's the platforms that you use to get information, and journalism is the source of the information. And what we're seeing is that there's a growing understanding of the importance of good journalism and good information, and there's growing skepticism around data sources and where am I getting my information, which is really rather profound. This year, we added some questions specifically around understanding whether or not the phenomenon of fake news and fake news being used as a weapon was a U.S. phenomenon. And what we actually saw was that 7 in 10 around the world worried about false news and information impacting elections and being used as a weapon. So clearly not something that's confined to the U.S., but this is a global concern. If you think of some of the new data privacy restrictions that have been put in the EU, it's clear that governments are starting to pay attention and know that we need to change. There's also uncertainty over, people are confused about what's real and what's fake. 63% said that they think that the average person doesn't know to tell good journalism from rumor or falsehoods. And 59% said that it's becoming harder to tell if a piece of news was produced by a respected news organization. So there's really confusion in the marketplace over what is good information versus bad information. It'll get better, I promise. The impact of that is what we're seeing is that more and more people are disengaging from news and news media. This year, over 50% said that they were disengaged, meaning that they're not consuming news on more than a weekly basis. So they're going a week without consuming news information. Only 25% said that they're engaging on a more frequent basis, and only 25% said they're actively consuming news and they're amplifying news and sharing it with others. This loss has impacted the lack of confidence in media in determining trust and truth. 59% said, I am not sure what is true and what is not true. 56% said, there's a loss in government leaders. I do not know which politicians I can trust. And 42 said that they don't know which companies or brands they can trust. So you can see that there's a general malaise around forming trust in institutions in general, and frightening drops in specific areas. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is one of the first times that business is trusted more than, trusted equal with NGOs. What's really interesting too is that we saw a drop in NGOs and relative stable in trust in business. And if you look at the drop in trust in government, well below 50%, both with the general population and roughly 50% with informed. You as business leaders have an opportunity. There's an opportunity as the most trusted institution to play a role in the path forward and to be active and engaged. What we found is that trust within business is fragile, that people have indicated that they, unless they see a company that they trust and they built trust with, only 63% said that they would use their product beyond an initial engagement. What did they tell us is important for companies? They said, safeguard my privacy, drive economic prosperity, invest in jobs. This isn't about quality of product. This isn't about selling a product at a fair price. Those are table stakes. The things that they've raised are important for building trust are around how you show up for your employees, how you engage the community around you. Are you creating opportunity for others? Are you engaged in your community and representing your employees well? So remember that, because I think business now has a major opportunity to actively engage within the community. The other big shift that we saw this year that's really significant, we had seen a trend for 3 or 4 years that there was a rise in a person like me or a coworker as one of the most trusted sources of information. And we speculated that that was because of the rise of social media. I could talk to somebody that was like me, I could talk to friends of mine, and I could form my opinion based on that information. With some of the, I would say, uprising of fake news and bad information through those social channels, we saw a huge drop. We saw a 6-point drop in trust in a person like me, and we saw a drop in an employee as a source of information. At the same time, we saw something that we hadn't seen in several years, which is a rise in a technical expert, up by 3 points, a rise in getting information from a CEO. We now have an opportunity to go back and provide credible sources of information for people as they've seen a decline in trust in those peers or peer sets. And that's a new trend. That's something that's bucking what we had seen for the last couple of years. But there's a mandate for those CEOs. 64% that they want CEOs, they want CEOs to take a lead and take charge rather than waiting for government to impose a change. And if you look at the trust builders with a CEO, they said, what's the expectation? That their products and services are of high quality. That was below forming trust. Business decisions reflect the company values, was below establishing trust. So trust was the top driver expectation of CEOs in an organization. I've got a quote from Mark Benioff here where he said, today CEOs need to stand up and not just for their stakeholders, but for their employees, their customers, their partners, the community, the environment, schools, everybody. What's interesting about this quote is it could have been said by Howard Schultz, We have very purpose-driven CEOs that are based out of the Pacific Northwest, and I want to share a couple of examples where I think that that's having an impact. It also could have been said by our mayor. I've seen 2 presentations by the mayor within the last week where she has said, we can't do it alone. We need business to step up. We need you to be a partner. We need you to take action with us along the way. So not only do we have a license to lead, but there's an expectation that we will take that leadership position. The 2 examples that I want to use, REI, another local company in 2015, went against what you would think would be common sense. And they said, you know what, employees have approached us. They hate being open on Black Friday. Why is Black Friday important to retail? It's the day that you go in the black for the year. It's a very significant business day for most retailers. And they said, you know what, that's against our values. We want our employees to spend Thanksgiving with their family, not in the store preparing it for the next day. And we want to encourage our members to go outside, not be sitting at a computer or sitting in a store. Now, that was a real risk, and that was a business saying that we're going to stand for something that represents the values of who our members are and who our employees are. What was the impact? Well, they saw 170 other organizations step up that year. They had over 1.4 million people pledged to opt outside. They saw a spike, which they had not seen in years, in membership, something that they had been struggling with as an organization. They struck a chord that was beyond trying to sell outdoor gear and really resonated with the values of the community in which they were a part. So I think a tremendous example of a business organization stepping up. In full disclosure, they're a client as well. The other one is more recent and arguably a little more controversial. Another Northwest company, Nike, when they stepped out a couple of weeks ago and celebrating the anniversary of Just Do It, used Colin Kaepernick as somebody standing up for an understanding that our African American community members don't feel that they're met with law enforcement in an equal way. And I'm not here to pick a side one way or another on the whole kneeling controversy about the NFL, but here is a company, and if you read any of the coverage, there were a couple of really good stories in the Wall Street Journal that talked about they had been, their sales had been down for 3 to 4 quarters. Adidas had been really just kicking them, and they had become less relevant. And yet 44% of the folks that bought Nike gear in the last year were within the demographic of 18 to 35. Nike took a bet on the values of the millennials that they think will be their customers for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And who's to say how it will impact? It's interesting. They saw a spike in protests or boycotting Nike, and that within 3 or 4 days had gone down. But arguably, they sought specifically to seek out a population that they thought was important to their future and made sure that they were aligned with the values of the organization. So not only should a company feel empowered, but I also think it's important to understand that your employees still are one of your most valuable assets, and it's really important that you engage them. When we asked who is trusted more, CEO or employees, 71% said that they would trust an employee more than a CEO. So clearly, how you communicate to your employee base plays a major role in how you're going to be perceived as trusting as an organization. But what's interesting is there's a bigger caveat. They expect more from employees. They also said that they expect employees to speak up. 82% said that they expect them to speak up if the company is doing something wrong. So you better be transparent with those employees. 80% said that they support the company's causes. They expect that the employees will support the company's causes. And 61% said that they expect employees to pressure management to do the right thing. So not only will they listen to the employees, but they have high expectations on how they're going to engage and impact the success and forward movement of an organization. I'll close real quick with what are some of the activities that you can do to activate your communities. Number one is define who you are. I mentioned REI. REI listened to their employees, and they aligned with the values of their members. And, it paid dividends. I guess that's a pun. But they also were true to themselves. And I think, we often have clients that come to us and they I need to stand up for something, and they want to stand up for the first thing that they hear. It's really important that you take the time. You can step in it if you're not deliberate and really assessing what your customers want, what your employees want, but make sure that you align with those individuals so that you can be truthful. And that expectation will extend beyond the product that you sell. Educate and advocate. You have an opportunity. With today's communication tools, you have a chance to speak directly to your constituents in a meaningful way. Come to them with something that's relevant and meaningful and meets them with the values that they share with you. Activate allies. If I look at some of the issues that we potentially face right now as far as tariffs and the impact on the Pacific Northwest and some of the commodities that are important to us and manufacturing and software sales, it's really important that you look to your fellow business leaders to really align and activate those that are around you. And then finally, create connections. And I can't think of a better organization that's doing that within our community. It's exciting to see the breadth of folks that are gathered here today. Those connections will help the role that I know that the mayor is asking us all to do, which is it's time for business to step up. I think we've got some great examples that happened within this last week with Jeff Bezos stepping up with a multi-billion-dollar check to focus on homelessness. And if you saw the front page of the Seattle Times today, I think Paul Allen stepping up to really create housing is an example of it's not government's responsibility, it's all of our responsibility to step up. And at the end of the day, we think that those are what represent the truth drivers. That's what's going to build a level of trust within your constituents, and at the same time, it's good for business, and we also think that it's good for the community. So I have to say, I am more optimistic now than I was a year ago, and I will say by some of the interactions that I've had with business leaders just within the last 2 to 3 weeks as we've all come back from the summer break, I'm thoroughly convinced that we live in a community where people want to engage and they want to build trust, and we want to solve some of the big, hairy challenges that we face as a community. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you have about the Edelman Trust Barometer 2018.
Oh, we have
Yes,
a question
right
right here.
Hello, thank you so much for such an amazing presentation. It's very informative. A little depressing at times, but very
I apologize for
informative. I was kind of perplexed by something in one of the graphs where it said that there was such a significant drop in trust for people who are like yourself. I find that really counterintuitive. Can you explain that a little bit?
We did too, but I think it's aligned with some of the. If you also saw that drop in platforms, and those platforms are, it's Google, it's your online platforms that you engage with, there was a huge hit. And what's interesting, I was sharing earlier before lunch, this data set was out before Cambridge Analytica became an issue, and people felt that their information had been manipulated and that they weren't receiving real information. Our belief is that a drop in a person like myself is the fact that a lot of the information currency that was shared through social media channels this past year, people are starting to question. Is it real? Can I trust it? And all of a sudden, you're seeing this swing. You saw that rise in journalism. People are realizing, I think, that they need to go to trusted sources more, which I find encouraging. There would be nothing better, I think, than if we had an informed electorate as we go to the polls this November.
Hello, I'm David Brenner. I'm very heartened by the percentage on journalism. I think that's really important too. I have two questions, one methodological and one substantive. The methodology question, if I read your first slide about informed public correctly, one of the factors is age 25 to 64. I'm 63. So I'm wondering why that choice? Is it the workplace, the idea? My substantive question is, do you think that the increased trust in business is coming at the expense of trust in government? And is that a problem for our democracy?
I will. So to your first question, I should have started by, I'm not a data scientist, and I know that we have, smart folks that I'm sure they had a reason that they did that. And, part of having a body of 18 years, whatever parameter they decided 18 years ago was going to be important, we've carried through. So I honestly, I don't know. If you give me your card after, I'm happy to look into it. As far as the rise in business, the greater fall has been the crisis in government. And what's interesting is if you look back, the trust in business dropped in Japan around the time of Fukushima after they had the tsunami. So there are gauges throughout the history of the Trust Barometer where we can see where the financial crisis in 2007, 2008 resulted in an increase in trust in government and decrease in business. So there was a general sense that there needed to be more government oversight. So I don't think one comes, and this isn't based on the data, this is my interpretation of the data, I don't think one has come at the cost of the other. I think we had a moment of true crisis in trust in government based on a lot of rhetoric at the time. We saw a breakdown in truth through our social media platforms. It was a bit of a perfect storm. At the same time, I think there's an expectation that if we've hit a pocket of turbulence, people are looking at the pilot, and I think that the pilot right now tends to be business leaders, and it's you better do something since you do have more trust, and I think that's what we've been advising clients. There are a lot of areas where I don't think business is stepping up fast enough. I think data and privacy in this country, if the technology, and we actually saw, I didn't share it today, but we saw a drop in, technology's always been the highest trusted sector, and we've seen a decline over the last couple of years, and arguably I think self-driving cars, AI, big data, there are some hairy things that the technology industry needs to get in front of, and if they wait until the government does, I think that's going to be too late. I think we've seen with some of the hearings with some of the social platforms in front of Congress is telling you that business isn't stepping up to lead.
We have a question to your right from our past president, Mark Wright.
Well, hi, Mark Wright with King 5 News. I look forward to the Trust Barometer every year. As you know, this is probably the most challenging time in the history of our country for journalism. We have a president calling actual journalism fake news. I'm encouraged to see the increase in trust in journalism. What's your advice to traditional media today? How do we continue to rebuild the trust in our customer base?
Boy, we were just having a conversation about this as far as you can't convey true thinking in a tweet. And I think the more that we can help people, to understand the importance of long-form journalism to really develop thought is critical. Sadly, I don't have, right now we have politicians that are using their direct channel through Twitter to your point, to really downplay true quality journalism and calling it fake news. At the same time, putting whatever comments he wants to in that format, and I think the data, from what I can tell, is moving in the direction that people are starting to understand that that's not reliable, and those links that are tied to Twitter or through Facebook or other social media channels are to be questioned. So I guess the good news in my mind is the data is telling us that people are starting to figure it out. As most things, I think self-correction is probably the most powerful. So, I hope, and after some of the things that we've seen that have happened since the data set went out in the field, I think we'll see an even further drop in trust in platforms. And I certainly hope that we see an increase in trust in journalism and in the value of investigative reporting. One more.
Not all media is created equal.
How do your statistics deal with the level of trust in, say, Fox News versus CNN?
We don't, we ask the question in general so that people are left to interpret what they see as media. I will tell you, I didn't share it today, but we did a swipe of trust data on people that had responded more favorably to Hillary Clinton and Trump. And we've done that actually in the last 2 years. Trust in media for Trump supporters was, as to be expected, very, very low. I forget off the top of my head, but I want to say like 16 to 18%. The Clinton supporters, the trust in media was disproportionately much higher. So if you use that as a lens to look at that data as far as trust in media, one could argue that you get a subslice of where people maybe are getting their information and what their sense of value is with those outlets. But we don't ask specifically about specific publications. All right, thank you very much.
Today's program is about trust. So in thinking about this, I found this. Oh, you guys are ahead of me. All right, so I found this Arab proverb reminding us that, well, it's very good to trust and have faith in something. It does not let us off the hook. We have to take responsibility. So this is totally relatable. Trust in Allah, but tie your camel. Thanks, everybody. It's been fun. See you next week.